I'm Becky Schild, and this is my classroom action research plan for EDOL 647. And some background about what my research plan is about. The first year that I started teaching was also the first year that they introduced the high school U.S. history end of course assessment. And for the next 4 years, we were consistently seeing that students taking this assessment were not meeting benchmark on the multiple choice assessment. So I began to seek out strategies to incorporate into my daily lesson plans that would not only help increase scores on the end of course assessment, but also practice proper test taking strategies. So throughout the school year, I tested different types of bell ringer strategies to see which ones will increase student scores on the end of course assessment, and the sample size for this research plan is roughly 95 students that I've got scattered throughout 4 different U.S. history class periods. Now, the purpose of this classroom action research plan is to find out which type of formative assessments lead to an increase in student scores on the end of course assessment, as well as incorporating successful test-taking strategies into the classroom on a daily basis. And this is going to be done in order to help reach benchmarks on the state assessment, improve content mastery. Now, some literature on this topic is, first of all, on student performance on assessments. The first piece of information talks about the fact that students do better on assessments if they are in a positive and a nurturing environment so that they feel comfortable, they can give their best efforts. And that, of course, is going to be established by the teacher in charge. The second resource here talks about setting high standards so that students know what is expected of them, and then that should equal out to better test scores. And this specifically looked at a classroom in Chicago and saw that typically society associates disadvantaged students with poor test scores. However, what this specific article focused on was showing that students, when they entered the classroom at the beginning of the year, were set to very high expectations. They were held to very high standards, and at the end of the year, they actually performed better on state exams. So there is data that shows that high expectations can lead to higher test scores. This last piece of information is just an explanation of what bell ringers are and what they can be used for. It is quick formative assessments conducted at the beginning of class. They could also be used as exit slips at the end of class. It can be used to revisit content from previous lessons, a way to trigger background knowledge, or also as a foreshadowing tool. And these are the references for those 4 different resources. And my actual research question is, which type of formative assessments, specifically bell ringers, will best improve student comprehension and retention? And the justification for this is because for the past 4 years, students at our high school have not met benchmark as an overall average on our end of course assessment. So it was suggested to implement daily bell ringers that imitate the types of questions that students will see on the end of course assessment. This way they are exposed to what they're going to see at the end of the year. However, our PLCs were unsure of which type of bell ringers would be the most effective, so I tried out 2 different strategies throughout this 2015-2016 school year. Now, our sampling is overall 95 students, 48 of them are males, 46 are females, roughly 5 sophomores. A majority of the sample students are going to be juniors. We've got 6 seniors, and out of this entire group, 5 students have IEPs. Now, our methodology here, this is just what materials or what instruments we need to perform this research plan. First of which are a recording method for the daily bell ringers. I have a weird obsession with bacon, so I incorporate that into my classroom, and so I call their bell ringer sheets their bacon bits, and we actually use 2 different bacon bits, and I'll have a visual of that in the next slide. But the first one, it said it had a spot for students to write the question and a space for them to record the answer. This was used during the first half of the year, and that was also the same type of bacon bit or bell ringer that was used in the previous 4 years as well. Now, the second worksheet that was used during the second half of this year, so from January until May, had a different format. It had a spot to summarize the question, a space to eliminate 2 answer options, a spot to record the answer, and then another location to correct it if their answer that they originally guessed was wrong. Along with the different types of bell ringer sheets, I needed sample questions to use for their daily bell ringers. Some of them were just questions that I created myself. Others were from the Regents Prep website, which I'll show you here in a second. And another location for the questions was from the Quality Core Test Bank. And that Quality Core is actually the same company that makes their end-of-course assessment, so that's a very good resource. And the last piece of material that I needed, of course, was a smart board to project these questions on for the students so that they can see them clearly. And here's just a visual. This is the first type of bacon bit sheet that I used at the beginning of the year. You can see just a spot for students to record the question, spot to record the answer. This one over here, the number 2, this is what I used for the second half of the year. I know it's kind of hard to see, but it says question, what are the key components, or how can we paraphrase this question? Eliminate, I want them to get rid of 2 of the multiple choice answer options. This third box right here is where they actually write down what they believe the answer to be. And then at that point we would go over the question together, and if they answered wrong, this fourth box right here is a spot for them to make any corrections so that they know when they want to use this as a study resource, they actually know what the correct answer is in the event that they originally answered it wrong on their own. Just this right here is the ACT Quality Core location that I would get some of their questions, along with the U.S. Regents website. Okay, now collecting this data, at the beginning of the year they started off, as I said, with this type of bell ringer sheet, and a lot of these questions were actually just made by me. I would write them on on the whiteboard. Kids would come in and they would know they had about 5 minutes to write down the question and write down the answer. Typically these questions were DOK level 1 or 2, and kids would have, like I said, about 5 minutes to answer it. Then we would go over it as an entire class, and that would provide kids to ask any questions or get any clarifications that they needed. And then after 2 weeks are over, kids would turn in their bacon bits for about 50 points possible. So every day's question was worth 5 points. Now, these are the results of what the unit assessments looked like while these types of bacon bits were being used. So, you can see here, this is just another sample size for my class period 1 and class period 2. Class averages for these various unit assessments are consistently falling below the benchmark level. Benchmark on the end of course assessment is a B or an 80%. And these numbers right here, we've got one group, first period, that on the very first unit assessment did reach 80%. But you can see for the rest of that first half of the year, from August until December, they were falling below what we would consider to be benchmark. So again, that is using the first type of bacon bit, the simple just question and answer strategy. Now, the second half of the school year is when we changed it up and we used the more in-depth type of bacon bit or bell ringer. Again, they would summarize the question, eliminate 2 answer options, write the answer, and then after we went over it, they would have their spot for any corrections. So, still worth the 50 points, same as the first half of the year, so that didn't change. Now, these are the assessment results for the second half of the year. So you will still see that consistently we are seeing students scoring below this 80% or what we would consider benchmark for the end of course assessment. So, let me get back to this. So we are not seeing any major, data that shows that these types of bell ringers had an impact on their unit exams. But another piece of evidence that we're going to look at is what the end of course assessment shows, because that is our ultimate goal, is to see an improvement on the end of course assessment. So, right here is data from the past 4 years of what the proficient and distinguished amount of students, or how many students have scored proficient and distinguished on the EOC. So, it says, along with assessing students' scores on classroom tests, performance on the EOC needs to be considered. So overall here, we see that in the very first year that the EOC was implemented, we had about 26.4% of students that scored proficient and distinguished. That went up during the 2012-2013 school year, and you see it's actually gone down over the past couple of years. Now, as far as formative assessments and bell ringers go, nothing has changed. They've used the same type of bell ringers those 4 years, and they were the very simple, just question and answer types. Now, something to point out is that although it is the end of the 2015-16 school year, students have already taken the end of course assessment. Officially, we have not seen the data for that. The individual scores have been released, but a compiling showing the proficient and distinguished rates have not been released yet. So, again, just to point out, during the time that this data was collected, that first type, a very simple bell ringer, just the question and answer, was used. And also, I wanted to point out, as I said, that even though we switched the Bacon bits from the beginning to the end of the year, the overall averages for the beginning of the year, just their summative assessments within the classroom, was 69%, and then when we switched to the other type of Bacon bits, the more in-depth ones, that went up to a 70%, so not a large increase, but we have a very, just a small increase, saying that possibly it could have been the different type of bell ringers that led to that increase in an average of classroom unit assessments. Now, this is the data that looks to be the most promising. This is going back to the EOC scores, and again, same percentages here showing the amount of students that scored proficient and distinguished. But this time we've added the data from the 2015-16 school year, so this current school year. Now again, I said that the official data has not been released yet, just the individual scores. So this is a disclaimer, this is all based on my math. So, but after having other people look at it, we came up to the same number, and the good thing here that we're seeing is that the amount of proficient and distinguished students made a very large jump from the past school year, the 2014-15 school year, from just above 40% all the way up to 66.2% of students scoring proficient and distinguished, and 66.2% meeting that benchmark. So, just some numbers here. It says out of the 89 students in my U.S. history classes that were exposed to the two different types of bell ringers, 59 of those students met or exceeded benchmark, which means they got a B or an 80% or higher on the state end of course assessment, which makes them proficient or distinguished. And that 59 out of the 89 students equals that 66.2%. So, again, some more analysis. In the previous years, all of the students were receiving that very simple question and answer bell ringer. And during these years, less than 50% of these students would meet benchmark, as we can see shown on the chart right here. And then after changing the type of bell ringer to the summarize, eliminate, and answer type, for the second half of the 2015-16 school year, 66.2% of students taking the end of course did meet benchmark. So this shows us that 24.9%, or an increase in 24.9% increase in proficient and distinguished scores from one year to the next. Now, I can't assume that simply changing this, the bell ringer strategy from the simple question and answer to the more in-depth kind actually, was the sole result for this increase in proficient and distinguished scores, but I would like to think that it helped contribute to scores going up. So the reasons for the end of course improvements based on our summarize, eliminate, and answer type of bell ringer. It exposes students to types of questions that they're going to see on the end of course. It gives students daily practice with test taking strategies, because again, they're having to eliminate 2 of the multiple choice answer options and then ultimately come to the correct answer on their own. We also have whole group discussion on how to come to this correct answer. We go over the type of bell ringer and come to the correct answer on their own. Students give the opportunity to say which ones they eliminated, and then they have to provide an explanation for why they believe the correct answer is indeed the correct answer. So, in addition to seeing an increase in proficient and distinguished scores on this year's end of course, I also gathered data on student opinion of which type of bell ringer they thought was the most beneficial. So at the end of the year, I asked students to record what they believed were the purpose of bell ringers and then what the benefits are, because of course it's always important to get some student voice so you can get a real, authentic, perspective of what you're doing in the classroom. So right here, this image right here is actually 4 different pieces of student work that I put together that shows what their opinions are as far as the purpose and the benefits of bell ringers. So this first column right here are the benefits of bell ringers, and I tallied up, again, that same sample size, roughly 95 students. Overall, the most common answers when looking at what the purpose of a bell ringer was getting an idea of what the lesson will be about for that particular day. Also, they believed the purpose was introducing a new topic or reviewing previous content. All of these were supported from the resource that I had on a previous slide about what the purpose of bell ringers are. So the students were pretty dead on here with that, so that's good. Now the benefits, as far as students were concerned, of bell ringers is that it helps keep students organized. It helps get them in the right frame of mind when entering class. And that's always good that you want to get students in a routine and have them know what to expect when they walk in, and then as it says, it lets them know possibly what they're going to be covering that day. And it can also be used as a test review. One of the positive aspects that students said about this second type of bell ringer, the more in-depth one, is that they've got essentially, by the time they turn this in, 10 different multiple choice questions that they might see on a test. So they now have possible test questions and correct answers to be reviewing from. And that wraps up the classroom action research plan, and we do not need to present the PLC focused one. So that is all. Thank you.